Hello and welcome. In today's video I'm going to show you how to make one of these half aprons. It's made out of an old duvet cover. Anyway, so let's get started with this lovely little apron. Cut a piece of fabric 40 inches or 102 centimetres wide and 20 inches or 51 centimetres high. If you cut on the fold, so if you fold your fabric in half, and then you'll only need to cut 20 inches by 20 inches, if you see what I mean, and then you'll end up with one continuous piece. The same for the ties. If you cut that on the fold, you're going to do two pieces that are 22 inches by 5 inches, and you need to cut that twice, and they both need to be on the fold. First, take the piece of fabric that measures 40 inches by 20 inches and turn under the sides and the bottom edge. So starting with the bottom edge, turn under 1/4 of an inch and then turn that 1/4 of an inch over another 1/4 of an inch and iron. When you've done the bottom edge, turn round and do one of the sides. Do exactly the same thing. Turn over 1/4 of an inch followed by another 1/4 of an inch. I just put a pin in the corner just to secure that. And then I move on to the other side, do exactly the same, iron it all the way down 1/4 of an inch and then fold it all over another 1/4 of an inch and iron all the way down to the bottom, and then again put a pin in that bottom corner just to hold it all together because it's rather thick there with all the layers of fabric. Sew down the first side about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fold, back tacking at the start. Sew all the way down to the first corner and continue right to the end, and then do a couple of stitches backwards so you're in line then to sew back up the side seam. So turn around, sorry, this isn't the side seam, this is the bottom edge. So sew all the way along the bottom edge again until you get to the corner, and this time stop where the two seams join. So just go over to the side seam, one stitch over to the side seam so you're in the side seam, then again do a few stitches backwards and then carry on forward up the side seam all the way to the top where we're going to back tack. Next we're going to make the gathers. To do this you need to sew 3 rows of stitches, which are well, on my sewing machine it's number 4 because that's the longest stitch I have, but it could be number 5 on your sewing machine. So the first one we sew 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and the one I'm sewing now we're sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the first row of stitching, and we're going to do a third row and that will be another 1/4 of an inch away from the row we've just done. Then we'll do the third row 1/4 of an inch over from the one we're doing now. We don't back tack at the start or the finish, that's very important. Don't back tack, just start sewing. When you do finish sewing, make sure that you leave nice long tails of thread. So sew all the way to the end, finish with your needle up, lift your presser foot and pull lots of thread out because you need to have nice long tails, and of course remember not to back tack. And then start on the third row, again 1/4 of an inch away from the one you've just done, and don't back tack, go straight into your stitching. Then fold the fabric in half down the centre to find the centre, and then I just put a mark so I know where the centre of my apron is, and then I put this piece of fabric to the side ready to start on the ties. Now for the ties we have 2 lengths of fabric 44 inches long each, but we don't want the join to be in the centre, so I'm going to cut one of the pieces of fabric in half down the middle and join each side to the end of the then centre piece, if you see what I mean, just avoiding getting a seam down the centre of your apron, which you don't really want. So we'll end up with 2 seams somewhere at the sides of our ties. So cut one in half, then add one side to each end of the remaining length. To do this we lay the 2 pieces out at a right angle with right sides facing, and then we're going to draw a 45-degree angle across from corner to corner. So from the top left hand corner of the top piece to the bottom right hand corner of the bottom piece. And then we pin this and we're going to sew, and we're going to do exactly the same to the other side. Then at the sewing machine we're going to sew along the lines we have just drawn, so directly on the line that you have just drawn. Back tack at the start and the finish, and remove any pins as you go along, and repeat on the other side. Next, to gather up the skirt, first you need to separate all of your threads because they tend to get a bit tangled up, so separate your bobbin threads from your top threads. I like to pull the bobbin threads to tighten up my gathers. I just think they pull a little bit easier. Anyway, once I've separated them out, I pull on the bobbin threads, holding on to all 3 threads and gently, very gently, pushing the fabric along. You work from both sides, so I work from one side to the middle and then go to the other side and work back to the middle. You can pin to your garment first, but I like to gather mine up a little bit first, then attach to the garment. Then once I think I've got sufficient gathers on one side to the middle, I go to the other end, separate the bottom threads from the top threads and do exactly the same. Gather up to the centre by pulling my bottom 3 threads. Then with right sides together, I attach the skirt to the waistband and ties. I have already put a mark to mark the centre of the waistband and a mark at the centre of the skirt. So the first thing I do is match these 2 points up and put a pin in. Next, you need to decide where you want the skirt of your apron to finish. Do you want to just be at the front, or do you want it to go around your sides a little bit? So take a tape measure and measure around your waist and decide where you want the skirt part to start and end. I've decided that I want it to go 26 inches around my front and sides, so I'm going to put a mark at 13 inches on each side of the waistband. I can remember when 26 inches would have gone all the way around my waist, but not anymore. So anyway, put a mark each side, so 13 inches each side of my centre mark is where I want my skirt part of my apron to start and finish. So the edge of the apron goes to the mark I've just put on the waistband, and I pin in place. Then even the gathers out between the centre and the pin you've just put in. In my case, I actually have to let out some of the gathers because I've been a little bit optimistic there. But when you've got your gathers all nice and even, then you need to put some pins in. Put as many pins in as you feel you need. This is somewhere where I do use pins, and you can put as many pins in as you like. Once you've done one side to the middle, turn your attention to the other side to the middle. So match up the mark that you put on your waistband with the edge of your skirt. Again, I've gathered way too much, so I'm going to have to let some of my gathers out. But anyway, match the sides up and put a pin in. Then even out your gathers, making sure they're nice and even all the way along, and pin in place. Again, use as many pins as you think are necessary. Next, sew the skirt to the waistband, taking a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now 5/8 of an inch comes between the second and the third row of stitches that you did for your gathering. Remember to remove your pins as you go along. It doesn't matter if you sew over your pins really, but I always think it could damage your needle, so I don't sew over pins. You want to make sure you've got your gathered side on the top, and this time you do back tack at the start and the finish. And if you do if you do the 3 rows of gathers, it means that you're sewing between the second and third row, so you will definitely have to remove that third row of stitches that you did for your gathers. You can remove all 3 if you want to be a perfectionist, but I'm not actually. Because I've done it in purple, I'm actually going to remove all of my gathering stitches, but you don't really need to, only the ones that you're going to see. And in my case, that would be, had I done it all in white thread, the only ones you'd see would be the outside one, because I am sewing, I don't know whether you can see, it's a little bit deceiving where I'm sewing, but I'm sewing between the second and the third row of gather stitches. And when you reach the end again, remember to back tack again. So as you can see, you can clearly see that third row of gathering stitches, so I'm going to unpick these. It's quite easy to unpick because you've not back tacked at the start and the finish, and it is a very large stitch and it does come undone very easy. In fact, if you break a stitch, you can sometimes just pull loads of the stitches out at once. I seem to be making rather hard work of it here, but it is quite easy to do. And once I've removed this third row of stitching, I do go ahead and remove the other 2 rows of stitching, just because I don't want you to be able to see them through the waistband as they're in purple. I did them in purple just so you could see. So anyway, I remove all the rows of stitching for the gathering. Next, take the waistband ends and we're going to draw a diagonal line, just so they finish at a point rather than finishing square. Don't have to do this, it's not essential, but I just think it looks nicer. So I draw a line at an angle and then I cut with my scissors. Now I place the side that I have cut on top of the side that I haven't cut yet, and I just cut off at exactly the same line on the other side, so we end up with 2 pointed ends to our ties. Then, with right sides together, pin or clip your apron ties all the way along until you get to the part where you joined your apron skirt to the waistband. At that point, stop and do exactly the same on the other side of your apron tie. Pin or clip in place until you get to the part where your tie meets your skirt and becomes the waistband. Then we're going to sew our ties together. I start at the side where the skirt is and I back tack to begin with, and then I sew taking a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I sew all the way down to where my angled slope starts. I finished with my needle down, lift my presser foot, turn, carry on sewing to the end where I back tack. And I do exactly the same to the other side. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish, and pivot when you get to the angle. And the next job is to turn our apron ties the right side out. This isn't too difficult because it's quite a wide opening, so I just put my finger inside, arch it over a little bit and pull some of the fabric out, and keep doing that until it's all the right side out. You will need something pointed to push out the ends, so once you get right to the ends, use a pointed object to push out the point at the end. Then give a good press to each side of our ties, paying particular attention to the side seams. You can kind of roll them with your finger to get them nice and level, and then iron them. And repeat for the other side of the apron tie. Give a good iron, make sure it's nice and neatly pressed. Next, turn under your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the raw edge of your waistband. You might need a tape measure to check every now and again, that's what I do. I pretty much know what 5/8 of an inch is now, but you do need to sometimes check. So every so often check with your tape measure, or if you have one of those special tools to check, and iron all the way along to the edge where it meets the ties. Then fold your waistband over so it's just covering your gathers, and pin in place. I'm actually going to pin on the wrong side first, then I'm going to transfer these pins to the right side, because we're just going to do one seam across the gathers and we're going to do it on the right side, but we need to make sure we're going to catch in the wrong side of the waistband as well, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to pin on the wrong side, there's the side we're going to be sewing on, and I'm just checking that all the pins come through, and they do, so I know I'll be catching in both sides of the fabric, and then I transfer the pins that I've put on the right side to the wrong side. No, I transfer the pins from the wrong side of the fabric to the right side of the fabric, and then I continue all the way along like this, so all my pins will then eventually be on the right side of the fabric, the side that I'm going to be sewing on, and I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of my waistband. Next, sew along the waistband on the right side of the fabric, back tacking at the start and removing any pins as we go along. We're going to try and stay about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the waistband, removing any pins as you go along. And make sure you keep your gathers out of the way so you can keep pulling your gathers towards the left hand side. Continue all the way along to the end and then back tack when you reach the end. All that's left to do now is to give your apron a quick iron, and then we're done. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, could you please like and subscribe? Thank you.